Welcome to another exciting episode of bringing Jesus back into focus from the blurry vision that has been around for 1700 years because they put the old Jewish Testament religion and Yahweh on top of him. And that blurred the vision of him and the divine loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world, which is only love. He is only love, the loving creator is only love, heaven's only love. Guess how you get into heaven? You have to be only love. Who said that? Jesus. Did Yahweh say that? Oh no. There are two gods, remember, in the Jewish religion. Please understand this. It is not a monotheistic religion. It never has been. There are two Yahwehs. The Romans had a Roman god of war called Mars, god of peace called Pax. The Greeks had Ares, the war god, Irene, the god of peace. The Jews were very cunning, they thought, and devious really, because they thought we'll put both the two gods, opposing gods, black and white, dark and light. We'll put them in the one temple under the one roof. You know, why not? The God of love and the God of war, one God. That's a perversion. And the Jewish Christians, in the book I explained, in the teachings of Jesus Unplugged, I explained how that perversion took over the Christian religion around the time of Constantine. So I shall now proceed to go to chapter 6. The Gospels of Jesus Unplugged is already printed around the world, and I've written the Gospels in order to untangle, again, Jesus from the Jewish overlays in the Gospels, which unfortunately are there, bad Greek translations, which are also, they have a bad inflection on Jesus, and I've had to correct those, and simplify it and use different language. Instead of God the Father, is our loving spiritual creator. So I've tried to make it more universal, more loving, and the way his words are translated by me, you will hopefully understand they're all about love and becoming transformed. And there isn't any apocalyptic stuff in it. So the teachings of Jesus Unplugged is what I'll be reading from chapter 6 tonight. And you can contact me at jcinfocus@gmail.com if you wish to discuss this with me, that's fine. Or if you wish to order one of these books, that's fine. I'll charge you wholesale at the moment, and just postage if you want a book. Okay, so that's the books, and this is the book we'll be reading from in chapter 6, The Teachings of Jesus Unplugged, which should be printed the first week in 2026. The spiritual teachings of Jesus are a universal calling to all human children on earth to awaken into our spiritual body and true identity of love and non-violence, before our dualistic body and mind of the flesh dies and returns to the earth. Only our spiritual body and soul live on. We must prevent the dualistic mind of our earthly body of flesh from controlling us and become at one with our spiritual mind, filled only with the loving life force of our loving spiritual creator. Then our two bodies, one made of the earth and one formed of spirit, can be in harmony and at one in purpose to bring the spiritual love and peace of heaven to earth for all children. Only true spiritual children of light and love can enter the heavenly spiritual world. All those children divided within themselves between love and hatred cannot enter. The words of Jesus can awaken and transform us. Absolutely correct. This is the daily prayer that I use to center myself into my spiritual body, because I know I've got two bodies, because Jesus told me. He said, get into your spiritual one, Christopher, before your other one, your horse dies. The simple analogy I like to use is water in a vase. I'm not the vase, I'm the water, but I need the vase to hold me here in this world while I can help other children. Am I a vase? The other one is I'm a spiritual rider on a horse. I'm not the horse is not me, but I need my physical horse to ride around and help children, to take my spiritual body to them. I like those two analogies. I think they're fairly accurate. This is a daily prayer to center myself into my spiritual body. I just think about I'm in my spiritual body, and my physical body is present, of course, but I'm thinking about my spiritual body that's going to leave my body of flesh when it dies. And Jesus taught we'll come into the presence of this divine pure love. So then the question is, how pure is my love? That's the question. Am I ready to enter that pure world of love? That's the whole crux of his teachings. I use the female aspect, she, but of course tradition uses the male aspect, he. So of course when you say this prayer, if you want to, just use the word he. If you're familiar, if it feels uncomfortable saying she. But I will point out in the English language, the word he, the pronoun he, is just male. And the Jewish religion, of course, based patriarchal society, they thought God was male. But Jesus, of course, never used the word Yahweh. You must remember that. He couldn't call this divine loving creator Yahweh, because Yahweh is made up of two different Yahwehs, a war god and a God of love. So Jesus never used the term Yahweh. If you hadn't noticed that, I'm bringing your attention to it. He couldn't use it. because it would have been wrong. He's only talking about the loving Yahweh aspect, but he took it to its ultimate understanding. He became at one with this divine loving life force. So I use she, and also, of course, women give birth to our physical bodies in the earth world. So it's reasonable to think that, she is a spiritual being who gives birth to our spiritual body. But the word he in the English language is male. But the word she, if you look at it, it's got both genders in it, hasn't it? Female and male in the one word, she. So I think that's a much more encompassing word of the loving spiritual being. She and he in the one word, so she. This is the prayer which I say every day. As I rest upon this earth, the Holy One, she will give birth to who I really am, awakening me from clay and sand, a spiritual child of the divine, with only her love that fills my mind. To every creature I will be kind in every single land, for this is truly who I am, a spiritual child of the loving spiritual creator in the heavenly spiritual world, born out of the earth, to bring her love to children in need and help guide them home to heaven as she has guided me, through the spiritual way and teachings that Jesus gave us to be just as he, a spiritual child of love on earth. The symbol, my logo, the Spirit Earth logo, shows the cross and a dove on top of it. They're the two bodies that Jesus had. He left in the dove body. The body on the cross was buried and it remained there. So that's there, and now we move on to the chapter 6. It's a bit of a long chapter, so I'll get straight into it. Now, the disciples don't understand Jesus. Right through the years they were with him, he was very frustrated because they weren't understanding this dynamic of the two bodies and God's only love, not the Yahweh two-headed God, etc. But it's understandable they had trouble because they were brainwashed into the Jewish religion, of course. They were deeply indoctrinated into that false religion. And Jesus was bringing them into just the love, nothing but love. So there's no war god Yahweh there anymore. He's cut the head off that. He's cut that head off the two-headed body of Yahweh. So they have a lot of trouble grasping that, of course. But Jesus was at one with it, and luckily the message has come through. At least to me anyway, and a lot of children. The following are examples of the disciples' inability to easily grasp the deeper spiritual meaning of the teachings of Jesus, especially that our loving spiritual creator is only love, not a two-headed God of limited love and war, as the Jews believed. It was a massive task to undo the years of distortions of the Jewish beliefs and teach the simple followers a new spiritual way and truth that went against their old dualistic religion in just 3 years. Despite their failure to easily grasp the deeper truths while with him, they did pass on his life-saving spiritual words and spiritual way of love for everyone in the world to be awoken to spirit. Because that was his whole thing. You've got two bodies. Get into the spiritual one before your flesh body goes back to the earth. That was his whole message. And then he explained how you get into it. Matthew 19:23. And Jesus said to his disciples, truly I say to you, it is hard for a man rich in material wealth to enter the heavenly spiritual world. Again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man in material wealth, a man rich in material wealth, to enter the heavenly spiritual world. When the disciples heard this, they were very astonished, as the Jews thought that those rich in material wealth were especially blessed by our loving Creator. So they asked Jesus, who then can be saved if the rich cannot? And looking at them, Jesus said, with people who rely only on the flesh, this is impossible. But with those who rely on our loving spiritual Creator, all things are possible for them. The disciples still haven't even grasped the difference between the teachings of Jesus concerning spiritual treasures, such as love, compassion, forgiveness, and selflessness that we need in order to awaken into our spiritual body and soul, and material earthly treasures, which in the end are as useless helping us enter heaven as our dead bodies of flesh. See, they're still thinking, well, rich Jews, they're very blessed by God, aren't they, Jesus? And Jesus is saying, no, they're probably not going to get into heaven. The poor will, they'll be there before them. Jesus is trying to free him up from all those false gods, you might say, worshipping money, that sort of thing. The disciples found that hard to believe. So you can see the difficulty he had. Jesus taught in Matthew 5:11, It is not what enters into the mouth that defiles a man, but what proceeds out of the mouth. This defiles a man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, lying, and slanders. Peter said to him, "Explain this parable to us." Jesus replied, "Are you still lacking in understanding also?" He must have been really frustrated at times. The disciples understandably have a very difficult time grasping that Jesus is teaching that we have two very different bodies in one with us right now, formed from two very different sources. One is formed from the earth elements, and one is formed from our loving spiritual Creator's life force. The Jews had many laws about what type of foods you could eat and foods that were not allowed or you would be defiled by them. The disciples were still stuck in the Old Testament understanding of spirituality. Jesus clearly states that putting any earthly foods in your temporary earthly body of flesh does not defile you because you are not really that body of flesh anyway. It is our spiritual body we must not defile, as that is our ultimate eternal identity and body we can be at one with in the heavenly spiritual world of love. We have a beautiful, perfect spiritual body and spiritual mind of love within our dualistic body of flesh, created for us to become at one with right now, to enter the eternal heavenly spiritual world after our last earthly experience called death. But it is empowered only by a clean, loving spiritual life force from our spiritual Creator. And it can only be damaged or defiled if we choose to do evil by our own free will. So that is the most important thing to avoid, to remain spiritually alive and well. Personally, I believe it is also very good to be a vegetarian, if you can, to reduce the suffering of other sentient beings in this world. Mark 4:10. After Jesus gave the sower of the seed parable, his disciples began asking him to explain it to them. And he said to them, "To you has been given the mystery of the heavenly spiritual world, but those not ready to receive it openly, it must be given to them in parables. Do you not understand this parable of the sower? How then will you understand all the other parables and the spiritual teachings they contain?" Again, Jesus is frustrated at the slow progress they are making in understanding his new spiritual way and the deeper spiritual meanings in his teachings. Matthew 16:6 and Mark 8:15. Jesus said to the disciples, "Be warned, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, Herod and the Sadducees." They began to discuss this among themselves, saying, "He must be talking about how we did not bring any bread with us." But Jesus heard them and said, "You men of little spiritual faith, why do you discuss among yourselves that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have hardened your hearts? Do you not remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many full baskets you picked up? Or the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many large baskets you picked up? How is it that you do not understand that I was not speaking about edible bread, but the teachings of the Pharisees?" Then they understood. Again, Jesus has to explain for them what he was really talking about, as they were still spiritually asleep and unaware they had a spiritual body within the body of flesh. They were still only thinking about food for the flesh, not aware of the spiritual food and way of love he was giving them with his words to nourish and strengthen their spirits and bring them alive. Again, the temptation of Satan when Jesus replies, "Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the loving spiritual Creator." They hadn't yet figured that out. Mark 9:31. Jesus was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The spiritual child of our loving Creator will be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he has been killed, he will rise again from the dead." But they did not understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him what it means. By now the disciples had been with him for some time, but because they still had no experience of their own spiritual body and soul mind of love, they had no idea we all have one as well as a temporary body of flesh. They could only think that Jesus was talking about his body of flesh coming back to life, which makes no sense as it returns to the earth. And they did not realize he was actually talking about arising from his dead body of flesh in his spiritual body and soul. They simply could not grasp at that stage the profound spiritual truth that he was teaching them and all of us. Matthew 16:21. From that time on, Jesus began to show the disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and be raised from the dead. But Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "May our loving Creator forbid this, Lord. This should never happen to you." Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on spiritual things, but on things of the flesh." Jesus makes a clear demarcation between our spiritual body and life and our material life of the flesh. In this case, Peter, one of his closest disciples, still had no understanding that we have two different bodies with us in one. He thought Jesus only had a body of flesh, so didn't want Jesus to die, not realizing he would rise again in his full spiritual body to appear to them. Jesus is upset with Peter, still not understanding this. Jesus strongly rebukes Peter by saying that he is aligning himself with Satan, the ruler of this dualistic material world, instead of with the Spirit. We see this also in the temptation by Satan of Jesus when fasting to turn stones into bread for the body of flesh. Jesus responds that we do not live by earthly bread and flesh alone, but by every spiritual word that nourishes our spiritual body and soul that comes from our loving spiritual Creator. Peter just didn't get it. A man from the crowd shouted, saying in Luke 9:38, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only boy, and a spirit seizes him, and he suddenly screams, and it throws him into convulsion, with foaming at the mouth, and only with difficulty does it leave him, mauling him as it leaves. I begged your disciples to cast it out, and they could not." Jesus said, "O you generation who are distorted and cannot be trusted, how long shall I endure patiently with you? Bring your son to me." While he was still approaching, the demon slammed him into the ground and threw him into a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit and healed the boy and gave him back to his father. Then in Matthew 17:19, then the disciples came to Jesus privately and asked, "Why could we not drive it out?" And he said, "Because of the littleness of your own spiritual belief. For truly I say to you, if you have spiritual belief the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. But this kind does not go out except through prayer and fasting." Jesus is frustrated with the disciples still holding on to the distorted Jewish belief in a two-headed God, instead of believing only in our loving spiritual Creator, so they can't be trusted to perform healings yet due to their own ignorance of the spiritual truth. The Jews have never worshipped only one loving spiritual Creator of universal love. And because they did not fully understand the true loving Creator is a beautiful spiritual being of only love, they could not yet be filled with her loving spiritual life force to strengthen their own spiritual body and soul, to empower them to heal other children. Jesus taught that until their eye is single and their spiritual body full of light, they will remain dualistic and divided within themselves and be in the dark. If you worship a God of war and a God of limited love at best, you can only be half full of love. This is why he told them to fast from the material world and possibly eat less as well, and concentrate on increasing their spiritual connection or nexus with our loving spiritual Creator in the heavenly spiritual world. For they needed to awaken their spirits and become her children and feel her spiritual loving life force in their own spiritual bodies. Then they could ask her for any spiritual thing they need and she will grant it. Interestingly, nearly all of the miracles Jesus performed were mainly about reducing the suffering of other children whose bodies of flesh were injured or ill. The spiritual power of love is all about loving others. Jesus said, "In my loving Creator's heavenly world," in John 14:2, "there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, to come anew, I will receive you to be near me, so that where I am, there you will be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going, so how do we know the way?" Jesus said, "I am the spiritual truth, the spiritual way, the truth, and the spiritual life. No one comes to our loving spiritual Creator except by my spiritual way. If you had truly known me as a spiritual child, you would have known our loving Creator also. And from this moment on, you do know her and have seen her love clearly through me. Philip said, Lord, show us the loving spiritual Creator, and it will be enough for us. Jesus said to him, have I been so long with you, and yet you have not come to know who I am, Philip? He who understands and knows me, a spiritual child of our loving spiritual Creator, knows her. So how can you say, show us the loving Creator, when I'm standing right in front of you? Do you not believe that I am living in the loving spiritual life force of our loving Creator, and the loving spiritual life force of our loving Creator is in me? The spiritual teachings I give to you are not mine, but are from our loving Creator, whose spiritual life force lives in me and does all the works I perform. Believe me when I tell you I am living in the life force of our loving Creator, and her life force is living in me. Or if you do not believe me, then believe because you have seen the miracles and works I have done, empowered by her love. Now this is quite a revealing dialogue that takes place at the Last Supper after being with him for over 3 years, listening to his teachings and watching him perform miracles and explain the nature of our loving spiritual Creator. But they were still unable to grasp the deeper meaning of all of his spiritual truths and teachings. Thomas can still only think in earthly terms of following Jesus to where he is going in their body of flesh. He has yet to realize there is a spiritual heavenly world just as real as this earthly world, but we go there through the inner awakening of our spiritual body after our body of flesh dies. He still has no idea that Jesus is talking about his spiritual body going to heaven after leaving his dead body of flesh, as they still don't understand the concept that we have two very different bodies with us right now. But that is the way we leave here to go to heaven, not in our dead body of flesh, but in our living spiritual body brought fully alive through understanding the spiritual teachings and way of love of Jesus. Philip's comment shows they still do not know who our loving spiritual Creator really is, unable to shake off the distorted dualistic God of the Jews. She is only love and true spiritual life, and Jesus is a living example of her spiritual child on earth who lived out of her loving life force to teach and guide children how to be with her in heaven, helping them awaken to her loving life force within themselves by becoming at one with her love. He is amazed that after all this time Philip clearly still has little understanding concerning his core teachings of the spiritual way of love and our loving spiritual Creator that they lead us to. So, Jesus being a spiritual child is just like his spiritual parent with the same characteristics and nature. This is what he called the new covenant. But they haven't fully understood this spiritual relationship they all need to awaken into and then become connected to her loving spiritual life force in their awoken spiritual bodies. We must no longer be dualistic and divided within ourselves, but full of the light of her love to become spiritual children like Jesus. In John 14:19, Jesus said to the disciples, after a little while the world will no longer see me, but you will see me because I will still be alive, so that you will also come to spiritual life. On that day you will finally realize that I am in a loving Creator's spiritual life force, and you will be in the same life force in me as mine will be in you. John 14:29, I have told you about this before it happens, so that when it happens you may understand and believe all I taught you. Jesus knows they still do not understand the deep spiritual meaning held within his teachings, so he's opening up about their spiritual bodies coming alive to their true spiritual life, just like his has through the loving spiritual life force of our loving Creator filling their spirits. He is telling them they will only fully understand what he's saying once he rises in his spiritual body from his dead body of flesh and appears to them again. He's telling them, look, once you awaken to your spiritual body and have the same life force that I've got in my spiritual body right now, then you'll understand what I'm saying. And he knew he would appear to them briefly in his spiritual body. He had that understanding from heaven. But they still didn't get it. John 16:16, Jesus said, in a little while you will no longer see me, and after a little while you will see me again. Some of his disciples said to one another, what is this thing he is telling us? In a little while you will not see me, and after a little while you will see me. And because I go to our loving Creator. So they asked each other, what does he mean when he says a little while? We do not know what he's talking about. They got no idea about the two bodies. They still don't at this stage, the Last Supper. This is easily the most startling revelation, that the disciples had no idea whatsoever that the ultimate purpose of all the miracles he performed with our loving Creator's life force in his spiritual body and the teachings he gave them was to help them realize that they had two very different bodies with them right now. One of flesh will die and disintegrate back into the earth, and one of spirit will live on, returning to our spiritual Creator, reaping what it has sown. It's quite stunning that at the Last Supper they still couldn't comprehend that he had a spiritual body. And we all have, if it's awake, if you're living out of it. But it's only empowered by love, you see. That's the key to it. The inside of the cup must be clean, not dirty. Otherwise it's tainted, and you won't be filled with light. Luke 9:51. Jesus was determined to go to Jerusalem, so he sent messengers ahead of him to a Samaritan village to make arrangements for them to stop and rest before continuing on. But the Samaritans wanted him to stay with them and teach them like he did with the woman at the well, and those Samaritans he stayed with for a few days. But because he was just passing through, they were upset with him and refused accommodation. His disciples James and John heard this and said, "Master, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" Yahweh, the war god Yahweh. Jesus turned and strongly rebuked them, saying, "You do not know what kind of spirit you are of, for the spiritual child of humanity does not destroy men's lives, but saves them." So they went to another village. Even then, the disciples were still worshipping Yahweh, the war god Yahweh. This is another stunning example of the enormous difficulty Jesus faced trying to bring his disciples out of the distorted two-headed God of the Jews into the singularity of the one true loving spiritual Creator. The two disciples were still under the heavy influence of the two-headed God of the Jews, with a violent, murdering, revengeful Godhead of War and a Godhead of limited love, and saw no problem as followers of Jesus asking their God in heaven to send fire down to consume and destroy all the Samaritans in the town for insulting him. You'd think they weren't there at the Sermon on the Mount. Being heavily indoctrinated and still trapped in the Jewish misunderstanding about who God really was, they were referring to an account in the Old Wine Testament in 2 Kings 10:12. In this account, Elijah states he is a follower of their two-headed God Yahweh, and he calls down fire from the heaven of this God Yahweh 2 times to consume 2 captains and their 50 men who had come to take him to their king. He did not want to go with them, so murdered them all with help from the Godhead of War, of the two-headed Jewish God of love and war, Yahweh. Clearly the disciples had absolutely no idea who our loving spiritual Creator really is, and even thought Jesus was still worshipping their two-headed God like they were. He must have been extremely upset at what they were inferring about him and our loving Creator, and amazed that they had made such little true spiritual progress after being with him for so long. His words say it all when he tells them they have no idea about what kind of spirit their spiritual life comes from, so how could they ever find it by still following the distorted two-headed God of the Jews? He then tries to bring them out of their delusion, distorted belief about the two-headed God of the Jews by telling them true spiritual children of our loving spiritual Creator never destroy men's lives, but only save them to heaven. It's astonishing to think the disciples were with him day after day, year after year. But we must remember they were coming from a very distorted, perverted religion where they were worshipping 2 completely opposite gods, a war god and a god of peace with the one name. That's a perversion. That's a distortion. That's certainly deceptive. As I say, Jesus just wanted nothing to do with the war god of the Jews at all. And he cut it off, he cut that head off the body of Yahweh, the 2 heads. Only left the God of love there. God is love, love is life. He who listens to my words and understands them and becomes at one with them will pass through death to eternal life. Well, there we have chapter 6, how his own disciples had trouble understanding him, and they were with him. And I mean, we've only got some of his sayings. They would have heard a whole lot more dialogues, a whole lot more examples, a whole lot more miracles he performed that are not there, they're not listed. But there's enough words there for us today to absolutely see him as love and the loving spiritual Creator as love, And because of the unfortunate Jewish Christian perversions, unfortunately, only some of us know Jesus correctly. As a pacifist, I've always known him as love and non-violence, so therefore the source is love and non-violence. I'm not a Jew. I'm not a Jewish Christian. I never have been, and I never will be. And I encourage every Jewish Christian to cut off the Jewish connection. Cut it off. And just stay with his words. Rip the book of Revelation out and burn it, and you'll just have his words of love. And even then the Gospels are a little bit poisoned. That's why I wrote the book, The Gospels of Jesus Unplugged, to remove that Jewish overlay poison. So there you go. If his disciples didn't understand it, but they were heavily Jewishly indoctrinated into the two-headed God Yahweh. So Jesus had a tough task. But today, at least, many Jewish Christians do know Jesus as love, so therefore they can find their way to heaven if they just stay with him and don't look at the Jewish religion. Don't look at it. No need to. So it's okay. Stay with him. That's my advice. Just stay with him. And as he said, it's his words. His words. That's what will save you, if you understand. So there you go. His disciples didn't understand him, and they were with him all the time. However, eventually, thankfully, anyway, they passed on the main sort of spiritual truths of love in his teachings. That there's enough there that can put them together. You just have to get rid of the rubbish. There is rubbish there. There's lies there. There are overlays there, Jewish overlays put onto him. You've got to remove them as well. And then you just see the love. As Jesus said, our spiritual loving Creator's love is like the sun that rises on the good and the evil. It's like the rain that falls on the just and the unjust. Unless your love is as perfect as that, you're not getting into heaven. Oh no, does that mean we have to be a pacifist? Yes, it does. Okay, I'm happy to do that. I've got two bodies. I'm only going in one, not two. Love your way to heaven. I hope you enjoyed that chapter. Bye for now.